This is Whiskey Whereabouts. I'm Tim, and whiskey YouTubers like me are always going on and on about 46% ABV whiskey, and that threshold being so important, right? And there are reasons why, and that is not what today's video is about. And I sort of took up the challenge to come up with a set of recommendations of bottles that are sort of the best of the 43% ABV level. I came up with 5. Of course, there's an honorable mention. There always is. Is your favorite on the list? Let's find out right now. My whiskey journey has taken me to Scotland and back. I've explored whiskey education, tastings, and distilleries from Islay to Speyside. And now my journey continues here with you on Whiskey Whereabouts. 46% ABV, non-chill filtered, no color added. I'm constantly talking about these criteria on the channel, right? To the extent that I have tote bags with them printed on it, along with a couple of other things I'm always going on and on about on the channel. It's such a thing that I have these. They're in the shop, whiskey-whereabouts.com/shop, along with the t-shirts, right? And these criteria are very, very helpful. They tell us a lot about the whiskey, but they're more guidelines than rules, right? Just because a whiskey doesn't meet every single criteria on that list, check every box, does not mean that it can't possibly be worthwhile. So today, I'm going to run down a list, some of my picks, some whiskeys that maybe don't quite meet all of those criteria, but maybe are still worthwhile. I honestly began the process of putting this list together looking for a top 10, and I kind of just threw up my hands at one point and said I'm really forcing it. The list that kind of needs some of the sort of watered down versions of better whiskeys just to fill it out. Your Glendronach 12-year, for example, just didn't seem worthwhile. So I distilled it down to 5 whiskeys that I think still are pretty rewarding, despite the fact that the ABV is a little bit light. And I am going to start with an honorable mention, as we always do. And this honorable mention is a whiskey that everyone is familiar with, that's available everywhere, and everyone pretty much likes it. There's only one problem, and that it's really overpriced. And this is a whiskey called Balvenie, 14-year Caribbean cask. This is a non-chill filtered, no color added whiskey. It's bourbon matured and it's finished in rum casks. It's pretty solid. It's sweet. You need to be into that, but it's a pretty solid sipping whiskey. The problem is that it's $100. I've seen it for more, and it's just too much. It's just too much when Quinta Ruban costs $75 for a 14-year with a better presentation in terms of ABV. So it's honorable mention just because I never pick this one up anymore because I think the bottle's overpriced. You're going to hear that again as we scale this list. But if somebody poured it and offered me a dram of this, I would never turn it down. Next up is a whiskey that keeps coming up on the channel just because of the nature of the list we're doing, and it's Tamdhu 12-year. I just reviewed this whiskey on the channel. If you missed it, check it out. Put the link right up here for you. And this is a whiskey that is 43%, and it is chill filtered. There is no color added, which is nice. It's Oloroso sherry matured in both American and European oak, and the older brothers of this whiskey have a much better presentation. This one I remarked in the review, and I put it on another recent list when I was talking about non-peated whiskeys at less than $100. And the reason this one kind of makes the cut and some others don't is it really presents to me as if it's sort of punching above its weight and sort of overachieving despite some of the limitations in the presentation. Again, whiskey's overpriced. This whiskey is an $80 to $90 bottle at this point, and it really is overpriced for what you're getting, but it is still delivering a pretty solid whiskey despite the specs. For number 4 on the list, I'm going to go to what we in the US think of as a little bit exotic. In the UK, flora and fauna is nothing that hard to find, but I'm going to go with the Ben Rinnes 15-year, and this is a terribly presented whiskey, but it is exotic to us, especially here in the US, and it is quite a unique whiskey. So it is going to be a 43% whiskey. Obviously, it's chill filtered. There's color added. It is 2.5 times distilled, so it has a sort of unusual distillation. They do use worm tubs. It does have a sort of sulfury, meaty quality to go with the sort of sherry maturation influence, and you should be paying in the equivalent to pounds, if you do the conversion, $60-70 for this bottle, which again, not the best presentation, but a nice robust age statement for a fairly sort of unusual whiskey. And we can consider this a stand-in as well for the others, like the Daluin and the Blarathel, floras and faunas, that are whiskeys that there just isn't that much of on the market. They mostly go into blends, and they have these sort of one-off, the flora and fauna presentations. And in this case, this one makes the cut. At number 3, we got a whiskey I'm sure that you knew was going to be on the list before you clicked on it, and it's the Lagavulin 16 year, a 43% whiskey with a bad Diageo presentation, the chill filtration, the color added. This is bourbon and sherry matured whiskey. It's also an absolute icon and classic Islay peated whiskey. There's nothing wrong with this whiskey except, once again, it's gotten really expensive, and it's gotten to the point where if you see this below $100, it is a buy, which is a lot of money to pay for this whiskey with this presentation, as classic and as much as we are all fond of this whiskey. It is overpriced to the point where I did an entire video with another list of whiskeys that are cheaper than this whiskey as alternatives. If you haven't seen that one, definitely check it out. I'll put it right up here. Number 2, I'm going to go with the most expensive whiskey on this list, and it is Glenfarclas 25 year, a 43% whiskey, no color added. There's some conflicting information about chill filtration on this whiskey. If you know for certain, let us know in the comments so we know. But it is a sort of classic Speyside sherry matured whiskey with a very robust age statement that can be bought for less than $300, a 25-year age statement. If I'm gonna go to that price point, I kind of want more than this. We're going to reveal number 1, a whiskey that recently competed in the Malt Madness tournament I did last month. It did very well, and it lost in its group to a cask strength whiskey despite being 43%. It performed very, very well, and you probably expected this whiskey to be on this list, maybe even in this position. It is the Benromach 15 year. It's on this list, so it has 43% ABV. It's not perfectly presented either. It is natural color, but it is chill filtered. It's first fill sherry and bourbon matured. It is a bottle that should cost less than $100, maybe closer to $90, and that means it is cheaper than Lagavulin 16 in most places, and a worthy alternative, especially if you haven't had it. A very, very rich, very robust whiskey for that 43%. Again, performed very well in a recent blind tasting, and one I would not turn away from just because some of the sort of specs that we look at or haven't been met. So let me know what I missed. What are your picks for the 43% whiskeys you still come back to in the comments? And in the meantime, if you enjoyed this list, I'd love it if you subscribe. You can press the big button that's going to come up over here so you don't miss any of the videos that are coming in the future. I'll see you on the next one.